Well, Tobias Harris is an expert on Japanese politics and a former fellow at the University of Tokyo. He joins us now live from Boston in the United States. Thank you so much for talking to us. Now, Japan has had, 6 prime ministers in 6 years without necessarily going to the polls. Just how enthusiastic are the Japanese about voting today?
I think we can already see from early voting this past week that turnout is down something like 15% from the last time around. So it's hard to say that the Japanese people are enthusiastic and that they're particularly enthusiastic about the choices they're facing. This election looks like it's very much going to be a rejection of the DPJ, a kind of vote out of anger and disappointment at how the DPJ is governed, rather than some kind of triumphant endorsement of the LDP and of Mr. Abe.
Well, as you say, the voters are projected to return the conservative Liberal Democratic Party of Shinzo Abe to power. What are the issues that appeal to the Conservatives' agenda?
Well, that's really the question here. I mean, is this really an endorsement for Constitution revision? Is this really an endorsement of changing the status of the country's military? And I think it's really hard to say that it is. I mean, if you look at polls before the election, what the country really cares about is getting the economy going again and fixing the social safety net. And Mr. Abe has spoken somewhat about new economic, fiscal and monetary stimulus. But, I mean, this is more a rejection of the current stewards of the government rather than some kind of vote of confidence in the LDP's ability to solve the problems that are most important to the Japanese people.
So you say the economy, the number one concern. What about energy policy, the nuclear issue? This election comes, almost 2 years after the Fukushima disaster. You know, if the Conservatives, who are pro-nuclear, are returned to power, are they likely to put the country's nuclear power plants back in service? And how would the Japanese feel about that?
Well, I would imagine that the LDP is actually going to have to approach the issue much as the DPJ has. It doesn't really seem, if you look at which parties are polling well and which parties are polling poorly, the parties that are most in favor of getting rid of nuclear power quickly are not polling well at all. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of appetite for, the public seems very realistic in terms of its attitudes towards how Japan can wean itself off nuclear power. And they seem to recognize that it's going to take some time. And so it seems that the LDP isn't going to be able to take full embrace of nuclear power as perhaps it did in the past, that it's going to end up having to make some concession to the fact that the public doesn't have a lot of stomach for nuclear power, but also recognizes that it's probably here for the near to medium future, if not for the long term. Right. So you're going to end up with a muddle that's very much like the Noda government has done.
And one last question for you, Mr. Harris. How might North Korea's recent successful rockets launch impact this election? How much fear is there in Japan today of North Korea's perceived militarism?
I think it's less a matter of how the recent launch will affect the election, which I think at this point, it's more or less a foregone conclusion that the LDP is going to win. It's just a question of how much. The more interesting question is what Mr. Abe will do about North Korea once he takes power. When you look at the last time he was in office, his approach to North Korea was very much emphasizing the issue of North Korean abductions of Japanese teenagers back in the 70s and 80s, which pushed hard enough, he ended up creating something of a rift with the United States, because the United States, of course, is much more focused on the question of the nuclear program and the question of the missile program. And so the question is Mr. Abe going to once again take that tack, or is he going to actually stay focused on the nuclear question and stay focused on the missile question, in which case there'll be, of course, much more cooperation with the U.S. going forward.
Okay, thank you so much for your insight. That's Tobias Harris, an expert on Japanese politics, joining us today live from Boston.